Generation 1 introduced into Pokemon the idea of split evolutions, single species that can branch off and evolve into multiple different paths. This was only present in Generation 1 with the Pokemon Eevee, which could evolve into Vaporeon, Jolteon, and Flareon. But in Generation 2, more Pokemon received split evolutions. Slowpoke got Slowking, Poliwhirl got Politoed, and Gloom got Bellossom, which alongside Vileplume is going to be the focus of today's video. Let's see which one of these Pokemon is better for a solo challenge of Crystal version. These are the rules. Now let's talk about the differences between these two. And honestly, there aren't very many. In terms of base stats, these two Pokemon are almost identical. They have 75 HP, 80 attack, 85 defense, and 50 speed. The only differences between them are their special attack and special defense, which are switched. Vileplume has 100 special attack and 90 special defense, whereas Bellossom has 90 special attack and 100 special defense. By the way, these stats become a little bit more interesting starting in Generation 6. Both of them received a base stat total increase of 10 points. Bellossom got this to its defense stat, whereas Vileplume got this to its special attack stat, which furthers the differentiation between these two species. But in Generation 2, they're extremely similar. Bellossom is slightly more favorable in terms of special defense, and Vileplume is slightly more favorable in terms of special attack. Another key difference between these two is their typing. Bellossom is mono grass, whereas Vileplume is a grass poison type. In Generation 1, the poison type really outperforms, largely because of their primary typings. In that case, the grass type gets Sleep Powder in most cases, as well as Swords Dance. Almost every single grass type Pokemon gets it in that game, with the exception of Execute and Executor. But in Generation 2, Swords Dance is no longer a TM. And unfortunately for these grass types, they do not get a sleep-inducing move. Bellossom starts with Absorb, Sweet Scent, Stun Spore, and Petal Dance. It only learns one move by level up, which is Solar Beam at level 55. And then through TM and HM, it has an extremely limited set. I'm going to read out every single move. Curse, Toxic, Hidden Power, Sunny Day, Sweet Scent, Snore, Hyper Beam, Protect, Giga Drain, Endure, Frustration, Solar Beam, Return, Double Team, Swagger, Sleep Talk, Rest, Attract, Cut, and Flash. Vileplume has the identical starting set. It does not learn Solar Beam through level up, and it has the same TM and HM set with one addition, Sludge Bomb, giving it access to one damage dealing poison move. I want to cover some other ways that these Pokemon can learn moves. So by breeding, they can get Flail, Razor Leaf, Swords Dance, and Synthesis. Obviously, Swords Dance is the best move here, and it can only be learned if the Pokemon that you're breeding with has the move from Generation 1. By prior evolution, they can learn Poison Powder, Sleep Powder, Acid, Moonlight, and Leech Seed, with Bellossom getting one additional move, Moonlight. And by transferring in from Generation 1, they can learn Bide, Double Edge, Mega Drain, Mimic, Rage, Reflect, Substitute, and Takedown. With one difference, Vileplume can get Body Slam, whereas Bellossom cannot. I'm not sure why that's a difference. Maybe the flower that Vileplume has is heavy and it can use it to slam with, whereas Bellossom is just kind of dainty and petite and it's not able to. I'm not sure. I like covering these because these solo challenges with an egg move or a move transferred from Generation 1 would feel fundamentally different. And if I was evolving along the way, I would get access to Sleep Powder, making everything easier. But today, I am going to have to suffer. Because if you didn't know, grass types are really not very good in Generation 2. Let's talk type effectiveness. They are weak to Falkner, they are weak to Bugsy, they are neutral against Whitney, and then Morty has a bunch of poison types. After that, we kind of have an advantage against Chuck and Price, although Price also has an advantage against grass types. And then Jasmine has the steel type, and while Steelix takes neutral damage, both of the Magnemite are going to be annoying. Then Claire resists grass types. After that, we have Will, which is a psychic type. It's going to cause problems for Vileplume. Koga is a poison type. Bruno is a fighting type, so we have a neutral interaction there. Karen has a Houndoom as her ace, and then Lance has a bunch of flying type Pokemon. By the time the grass types get to Kanto, beating gym leaders here is easier, but that's the case for every single Pokemon in the game. There is no advantage to doing a solo challenge and having an easy time against the Cantonian gym leaders, because the end of the game in Pokemon Crystal really comes down to how a Pokemon matches up against Red. A resistance to Pikachu is a nice thing, but Blastoise has Blizzard and Charizard has Flamethrower. Plus, Venusaur loves to set up Sunny Day before the Fire type comes in. And without Sleep Powder, I'm expecting this late game to be pretty rough. Also with Vileplume, I am weak to the Espeon, which is Red's fastest Pokemon. And with a slow grass type, I don't think that I'm going to be moving first, even with stat experience and the speed boost from Whitney's badge. The early game is pretty annoying, and Bellossom is at a small disadvantage here, because the only two damage dealing moves that I have access to are Petal Dance and Absorb, both which do special damage. Because of its lower special attack, it is knocking out enemy targets slightly slower than Vileplume is. It also doesn't gain any advantage in this section of the game because its special defense is not usable in the early game when most opponents are attacking with physical moves. Well, the Bellsprout and Sprout Tower are using Vine Whip, but we don't care about that move anyway, and Vileplume's Poison type gives it a double resistance to grass type attacks, so it actually takes less damage here anyway. I'm exploring this optional area of the game and fighting trainers here to level up as much as possible before going into the gym. I want it to be a high enough level so that I knew I could beat Birdkeeper Abe on my first attempt without any blackouts, because there's no advantage to losing to him since he only has one team member. That said, at level 13, Bellossom has no problem using Petal Dance. And that is an advantage for these two Pokemon, especially in the early game. They have the medium slow growth rate, so they're leveling up very quickly. Still, I didn't try to push things here. I think fighting Falkner at level 13 will be enough as long as both of them are holding a berry. But before we get into Falkner, I want to talk about the sponsor of this video, Raycon. I have been loving their new Everyday Earbuds Classic. As you can hear in the background, Churro is making a bunch of noise right now, so the active noise cancellation on these earbuds is such an amazing feature when I'm trying to stay focused and get work done. But I've talked about the earbuds before. Today I want to mention a new product from Raycon, their bone conductive headphones. They deliver off-ear audio, so all of the vibrations are sent directly to your bones. This means your ears are clear so that you can still hear stuff in the surrounding environment, which is sometimes really important. For example, I like to be able to hear my wife if she's trying to communicate with me while I'm doing chores around the house. The bone conductive headphones also have 13 hours of battery life, and they are IPP68 waterproof and dust proof. This means they're safe for sweat, rain, or even to be taken to a sandy beach for a run. And unlike earbuds, they have a fit that goes over your ear, and so they're not going to slip if you're doing some kind of physical activity. Raycon once again is giving you premium performance, but at half the cost. And they also offer a 30-day happiness guarantee. If you want to try out the bone conductive headphones, go to buyraycon.com/ScotsThoughtsBC to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/ScotsThoughtsBC. Thanks to Raycon for the ongoing support. Now let's get back to Falkner. Falkner leads with Pidgey. I go for Petal Dance, and I one-shot his lead. Perfect start to the fight. Bellossom levels up to 14, he sends in Pidgeotto. I'm locked into Petal Dance now, but it does more than half to his ace, and while he does get a critical hit with Gust, which is super effective, it doesn't do that much damage, and then my next hit with Petal Dance knocks out his final Pokemon. So overall, an easy win for Bellossom. When I sat down to play these solo challenges, I thought that Vileplume would have the advantage. In solo runs, it tends to be the case that Pokemon with higher attack stats fare better. Also, the addition of Sludge Bomb with the same type attack bonus felt like it was really going to make a massive difference, especially when the Poison Barb comes fairly early into a playthrough, and Sludge Bomb is functionally a replacement for Return, which is one of the most powerful moves in Generation 2. Just in this case, as a Poison type, it's going to be doing more damage. Whenever I do these versus videos, I have to choose which Pokemon to play first, and I always choose to play the underdog second when I have more experience. This fact is on display because I go into Violet City with Vileplume and immediately head for the gym and fight Birdkeeper Abe at only level 8. This is not the most confident victory for Vileplume, I just barely pull through on red health. That's why for the Bellossom playthrough, I adjusted things and went into Sprout Tower to get additional levels before coming here. But with Vileplume, I pushed forward and fought Falkner at only level 10. Unlike at the higher level, I have to two-shot the Pidgey. This means I'm going to be subjected to confusion against the Pidgeotto. Also, Vileplume can only do 1/3 in damage. Luckily, it doesn't hit itself, and I think because of that, I'm able to pull through with a victory here against Falkner on my first attempt at the lower level. So Vileplume gets a first split of 5 minutes and 31 seconds, which puts it off to an early lead. That said, there is so much pain just around the corner for these two Pokemon. And because of that, on my way south towards Union Cave, I fight a bunch of optional trainers for additional experience. I continue fighting trainers inside of the cave, like these two hikers, because they give fast experience, especially when I have a grass type move. Unfortunately, I can't go to the basement floor and pick up Swift, which would definitely help in the next section of the game. I'm just gonna have to continue with the exact same moveset because there are no other options except for teaching Flash, which in Generation 2 is an HM move, and then I couldn't unlearn that until I get to Blackthorn City, which doesn't seem like a good idea. Also, it has 70% accuracy, so it's basically just gonna miss all the time whenever the player chooses to use it. Slowpoke Well is a little bit annoying because there's a bunch of poison types here which resist Vileplume's attacks. It's slow going, but eventually I clear all of the rockets. Inside the gym, I fight some optional trainers, and because of confusion, this Ladybot actually ends up being slightly scary. By the way, I have to remind you all that this Pokemon took out Tyranitar when I was doing a bunch of live streams. I think that's its biggest accomplishment ever because Ladybot is a really bad Pokemon. I'm gonna play it in Crystal version later in the year. After finishing off all the trainers here, I'm over a damage rounding threshold at level 20. Let's see if this is enough to take on Bugsy. Metapod is first. In this case, I'm going for Petal Dance because I don't think Absorb with an effective power of 15 is the right choice. It takes 2 shots to knock out his lead, and then Kakuna comes in. Unfortunately, Petal Dance does just under half. Vileplume gets confused, Petal Dance fails to knock out. Luckily, Kakuna cannot poison Vileplume, which is a downside Bellossom is going to have to face, but after I finish the Kakuna off, I have to move on to Scyther, and this is the Pokemon I'm most worried about. It has Fury Cutter, and even though this does neutral damage to Vileplume, it just stacks up every turn, and my attacks with Petal Dance are doubly resisted. So it has an effective power of 26, and it's doing very little damage to Scyther every turn. Because of increasing damage from Fury Cutter, I realized quickly that I need to break Bugsy's combo, and the only way that I can do this is using Stun Spore. Unfortunately, Vileplume hits itself, and because of that bad luck, Scyther hits with Fury Cutter, knocking me out, giving me my first reset of today's runs. I tried again, Stun Spore misses, and because of it, I lose for a second time. I should mention that there is the possibility of using Sweet Scent here to lower the Scyther's evasion. Then Stun Spore has slightly more accuracy and I would be more consistent with it, but I think wasting a turn on Sweet Scent when Stun Spore has 75% accuracy just isn't worth it. I got a little bit indecisive here, not sure of what I should do next. Maybe I should be blacking out against Bugsy, so I leave the gym, buy a bunch of items to use up my money, and then I come back with that as my intent. However, this time around, I just get lucky on the Scyther. I hit it with Stun Spore and then Petal Dance does enough work. I don't hit myself in confusion. Scyther has its combo broken. It goes for quick attack and eventually Vileplume finishes it. Yeah, I got lucky right away when I was intending to block out. This is always how it seems to go. I reset many times, then when I start blacking out for experience, I just win right away. Anyway, let's move on to the rival, and this one also has the potential to be quite brutal for Vileplume, because his lead is Ghastly and his ace is Quilava. I always face the team that's going to be most difficult for my solo Pokemon. I just barely can't one-shot his lead, which is annoying, leaving Vileplume exposed to paralysis from Lick. Luckily, the secondary effect doesn't activate. He sends in Quilava next because of type effectiveness. Due to Vileplume's low speed stat, I am tied with this fire type, which isn't particularly fast. I have to use Petal Dance to knock it out, which is doing roughly 1/3 per turn. Quilava goes for Smokescreen. Luckily, Vileplume doesn't miss or hit itself in confusion. I get 3 turns of the grass type move and finish off his ace. But I'm still not through the woods yet because Zubat is last and it has a double resistance to grass type moves. Luckily, it's pretty weak and Leech Life isn't doing that much damage, and Petal Dance is pretty strong here just because my special attack is good. Eventually, I'm able to finish off the rival's final Pokemon, and that's it for Azalea Town. Normally, I don't switch back to the other Pokemon I'm doing in a versus video at this point in the run, but I am going to today because I think this section of the game deserves discussion back to back. All of the training leading up to Azalea Town is roughly the same for Bellossom. With it, I remember to pick up the Miracle Seed, which I accidentally skipped with Vileplume. This gives it a 10% boost to damage from grass type moves. And it's not even an advantage in this section of of the game, since now it's going to do roughly the same damage that Vileplume would be doing anyway. Bugsy is next, and the problem here is that without the poison type, I am less defensively capable against his ace. You can see with Bellossom, I have intentionally over-leveled slightly for this fight. I'm 21 instead of 20, but the additional level doesn't put me over a damage rounding threshold, so my damage is going to be roughly the same, which is unfortunate. Bugsy's second Pokemon, Kakuna, can poison me, and it does happen. As a result, I move on to the Scyther in the worst possible position. I'm going to have to break its combo using Stun Spore, but with poison stacking on damage every turn, Bellossom doesn't have what it takes. I wasn't sure if grinding against Bugsy made a lot of sense, since his Cocoon Pokemon don't give particularly good experience yields. Also, walking through the entire gym every single time after a blackout does waste a little bit more time than blacking out to the rival over and over again. So maybe fighting him makes more sense. Interestingly enough here, the rival's team is ordered differently, because he sees that Zubat's Leech Life is super effective against my Grass type and sends it in second. This gives me more experience to gain from the fight before I move on to the Quilava and Blackout. It's also worth noting that this fight is close anyway. I think it's going to be possible for Bellossom to just luck through this if it doesn't hit itself in confusion. And this puts me in the exact scenario that is perfect for Blackout training. No other trainers that are good to fight, no good wild Pokemon to battle, and a chance of winning the fight if luck aligns. I had a total of 2 Blackouts here, but in my third fight against him after reaching level 22, I am able to finish off the Quilava and move on with the playthrough. That got me to level 23 before going back to Bugsy, which is over the next damage rounding threshold. This gives Bellossom the damage range it needs to 2-shot the Kakuna, but I decided not to, instead using Absorb to heal back some health and move on to the Scyther without being confused. I use Stun Spore, paralyze it, then use Petal Dance, and luckily for me, I pull through in this fight. I genuinely thought that Bugsy was going to be so much worse for Bellossom, but getting by him in only 16 minutes and 49 seconds total is really not that bad. I was expecting a split here over 20 minutes, and I was anticipating that I'd have to do some wild grinding. Maybe these Pokemon are not going to perform as badly as I thought at the beginning of this video. Okay, let's talk about a frustrating, notable omission from the TM and HM learn set for both of these two. They cannot learn Headbutt, one of the generic normal type moves that almost every Pokemon gets access to. And in Pokemon Crystal, it is extremely overpowered. But instead, I have to continue playing the game with my current moveset. Inside National Park, I grab myself the Quick Claw, which should be useful for these Pokemon as the game progresses. I think it might be key against Lance as well as Red at the end of the game, although I'm hoping that's not the case, because relying on the Quick Claw for a win is never fun. Fighting the mandatory trainer inside of Whitney's gym brings Bellossom up to level 25, and now I guess I'm ready to beat the normal type specialist. I don't anticipate that this is going to be a particularly difficult battle, which is nice because Morty is coming up next, and I'm expecting that one to be dreadful. Clefairy's first. Just so I don't confuse myself with Petal Dance, I use Absorb to knock it out, gaining back all of the health that it deals, well, except for 1 point. Then Miltank comes in, and just like with Bugsy, I'm going to use Stun Spore here to increase my chances of breaking its combo. We both miss on turn 1, as well as turn 2, but then on turn 3 it starts rolling, and I use Stun Spore. After that, Petal Dance does a ridiculous amount of damage. Miltank is fully paralyzed, and I 2-shot her ace. Okay, so going for Stun Spore was objectively a mistake. Petal Dance is all that Bellossom needs. And with Vileplume and its increased special attack stat, even though I don't have the Miracle Seed, I can still just 2-shot the Miltank, even though I'm 2 levels lower. In my first playthroughs of Pokemon Crystal, I do not allow myself to use Hidden Power. And that is a major disadvantage for Pokemon like Vileplume and Bellossom, which have such limited type coverage. But I can go back to the department store and finally get myself the TM for return. This NPC gives it to the player whenever your lead Pokemon has at least 150 friendship, which is typically obtained around this point in any playthrough. Once you've defeated Whitney, you can usually go back and grab it, especially if you've done some optional training in the early game. For some Pokemon with the slow growth rate, this won't be possible since you haven't leveled up and gained enough friendship by this point in the run. But typically those Pokemon just get Headbutt, and so you can just use that for the next section of the game and then fly back to get return later. Or simply pick it up once you finish the basement in the Rocket plotline, which is typically the play that I like to do. In this case, having a normal type move for coverage damage actually makes sense, even though normal is not the best coverage type, especially when the next section of the game is filled with ghost-type Pokemon. Luckily, the Kimono Girls give me a bunch of experience before I have to take on any of the ghosts. And because I knew that they would be problematic, I decided to go to the Lighthouse to do additional training first. This levels Vileplume up to 29, and I almost get to 30, but I didn't want to fight additional wild Pokemon in order to level up over the damage rounding threshold before fighting the rival in Burned Tower. Haunter is first. I am faster than it, which is nice. However, Petal Dance is going to two-shot, giving it a chance to use Curse. And if it sets this up, I think I just immediately lose because I'm locked into Petal Dance and then I have to continue using it against the Quilava. By this point, I'm taking a ton of damage every turn, and if Vileplume hits itself, I definitely cannot win. Especially considering that he has a Magnemite and a Zubat left over. I now have neutral damage for the Zubat, but the Magnemite still resists all of my attacks. I have another loss here, which is essentially identical to the first one. I get hit by Curse and then Vileplume hits itself with Confusion. To counter one of these disadvantages, I can use the Bitter Berry so that I don't confuse myself. Now, there is a chance that the Haunter goes for a different move, something like Lick, Spite, or Mean Look. If one of these gets selected, then I think I'll be able to pull through the fight. Unless Lick inflicts paralysis, then Haunter moves first, uses Curse anyway, and I end up back in the same scenario I was in before, just this time I'm paralyzed too. Okay, let's talk about solo challenge theory. In this case, I could grind to a higher level and give myself better damage ranges against his Pokemon. But if I'm not going to one-shot the Haunter, then this doesn't really make that much sense. Until I'm one-shotting the Haunter, my odds in this fight don't improve that much. And then once Vileplume starts one-shotting the Haunter, its odds dramatically improve. Especially in Johto games, it makes more sense to luck through fights like this rather than trying to do it in some kind of consistent way. Of course, if you allow yourself to use Hidden Power, picking up Hidden Power Dark would be an amazing solution at this point in the run. I checked the damage ranges just so that I was 100% sure before claiming something for all of you, and yes, both of these Pokemon can one-shot the rival's Haunter when using Hidden Power Dark. Knowing that I'm not going to gain much advantage by leveling up at this point in the run, especially against weakly wild Pokemon, I decided to lock in and just wait until the Haunter didn't do something. If it uses Lick, doesn't paralyze Vileplume, I think from there I'll be able to win. Unfortunately for me, I get burned by the Quilava the first time this happens, and due to that I end up taking a loss against the rival in a very close fight. So I kept grinding, looking for the win. If you're wondering why I'm not blacking out here, I don't really think it makes that much sense. I'm only getting experience from the Haunter in most fights, which is not a lot, and then I have to walk all the way back over to this area, plus I lose money. So resetting saves more time. Unfortunately, it only saves time if I end up getting lucky fairly soon, and I don't. I have so many resets here. After a total of 11 in the playthrough, I finally make it by the Haunter, finish off the Quilava without getting burned, and then I can knock out the Magnemite as well as the Zubat using Return. At long last, Rival 3 is finished. Knowing that he was this brutal for Vileplume, I did do some extra training with Bellossom to get it to level 31 before fighting the rival. This took me over to the Lake of Rage in order to fight trainers that have decent experience yields. Without scraping the bottom of the barrel for experience, I'm not going to be able to go over the next damage rounding threshold, but maybe the slightly higher level is going to give me an advantage. Unfortunately, I still just have to two-shot the Haunter, which leaves me exposed to Curse. And just like with Vileplume, if I get hit by this status condition, the fight is not going to work. There exists an alternate strategy here, which is potentially paralyzing the Haunter, having it miss its attack with Curse, and then knocking it out using Petal Dance. I tried to make this work, but in the end I think it's worse than just waiting for the Haunter to use a bad move. I once again have so many resets here, a total of 10 against this rival, bringing Bellossom's count up to 12 with 2 blackouts. And then, at long last, I scrape my way through with a lucky win. Now, you might have anticipated this, but this is where the run has the potential to become absolutely unbearable. I have to face Morty, who has 4 Ghost-type Pokemon, and the first 2 of them no Curse. This status condition just punished me against the rival, and I expect that it's going to be just as bad here. Ghastly is first. This is the first obstacle in my way. Is it possible that Petal Dance might one-shot? And the answer is yes, it does. Avoiding Curse from his first Pokemon. Haunter is next. I have to continue using Petal Dance since I'm locked into it, and the Haunter just goes for Nightshade, so I don't get hit by Curse, although I am confused for the Gengar, which is next. It's faster, it whiffs a Hypnosis since Morty only has a 45% chance of landing this move on any given turn. Then Vileplume hits itself, Gengar hits Hypnosis, I wake up because of my Mint Berry, then Confusion doesn't activate, Gengar starts whiffing its hits, and Bellossom gets a lucky critical hit, finishing the Gengar. I can't believe it, I'm gonna beat Morty on my first attempt. I don't deserve this. Bellossom doesn't deserve this. Anyways, there's only one more Haunter left over, and while I am confused, Nightshade can two-shot, and I take the win. Maybe Vileplume is gonna struggle here? Well, with higher special attack, I one-shot the first Ghastly, but then the Haunter does set up Curse. However, in Generation 2, when a Pokemon gets knocked out, you do not take Curse damage. This lets me move on to the Gengar, and while I am doing more damage, it's still gonna be a 3-shot. Unfortunately, it hits Hypnosis twice in a row, and because of that, I'm not able to win. I have to say, while this fight is annoying, it's not nearly as bad as other Pokemon, like Jumpluff, which had to rely on Leech Seed for this fight. I am dreading Hoppip, another Pokemon that I'm going to be playing later this year. If you like me playing with really awful Pokemon in Crystal version, the end of this year is going to be a lot of fun for you. If you prefer seeing me play the game with fantastic Pokemon, don't worry, I'm also going to be playing with some absolute powerhouses. But that does make me wonder, why are you watching this video? After finishing off a bunch of trainers near the Lake of Rage, I come back to Morty at level 33. One-shot Ghastly, Haunter goes for Hypnosis instead of trying Curse. Because of that, I two-shot with Petal Dance, and then Gengar comes in. It misses Hypnosis, Vileplume hits itself, it misses Hypnosis again, Vileplume goes for Petal Dance, doing more than 1/3, but still not enough to two-shot. Gengar misses Hypnosis for a third time. Vileplume gets a critical hit, just like Bellossom, and as a result, Morty's ace goes down, and I take a win. Okay, huge sigh of relief. The grass types are past the awful early game. From here, I'm going to be able to pick up my pace because things are going to get a lot easier. Chuck is the next gym leader, and he has a water type as his ace, and Primeape is just not very good, especially when Vileplume has the poison type. I don't care about these Pokemon. I can essentially do whatever I want in this fight. Petal Dance one-shots Poliwrath, and I earn myself the 5th badge incredibly quickly. Finishing off the Rocket headquarters allows me to get access to the Sludge Bomb TM, but this is kind of badly placed in any Johto playthrough because you're picking it up with Jasmine just around the corner, and obviously a poison type move is not good against her. And my other moves are also not very good against her Pokemon, making me overall worried for the battle, since she is typically the most difficult trainer in Johto. Price, on the other hand, is gonna be easy. He leads with Seal, I go for Petal Dance, and I one-shot. He sends in Dugong next, Petal Dance continues, and it also one-shots. That leaves only Piloswine, and while Vileplume is confused, I still hit with Petal Dance, and I get a clean sweep. Now I have to face the Steel-type specialist, and just like with Morty, there isn't really anything I can do to make this fight easier on Vileplume. With good Pokemon that are going to have a fine time in the late game, it usually makes sense to use rare candies before her, but with Vileplume and Bellossom, that's not going to be the case. I have to two-shot the Magnemite using Petal Dance, leaving me exposed to Paralysis on turn 1, which is so annoying. Then I'm confused for the Steelix, which does come in second, giving me a small advantage. Unfortunately, Vileplume hits itself once, takes a bunch of damage from Iron Tail, and while I do attack with Petal Dance, it's not enough to one-shot her ace, and Iron Tail finishes the fight. I kept trying, and I kept losing. Eventually, I'm using the Paralyzed Cure Berry to heal the status condition, and then move on to the Steelix, with at least semi-reliable Petal Dances, although I am typically confused by this point. Also, with the damage that Petal Dance is doing, Jasmine is in Hyper Potion range, so she heals the Steelix, making my Vileplume take even longer against her, increasing the odds that I will confuse myself again. But after only 2 defeats, finally she uses her Hyper Potions, and I don't have bad luck against her ace. As a result, I finish it off, move on to the final Magnemite, and I clean it up. Okay, to summarize, I think this was an annoying battle, but overall it wasn't the end of the world. The rival in Burned Tower was by far the worst part of the mid-game so far for Vileplume. For Bellossom, this section of the game is almost identical. Chuck is extremely easy, Price is also simple, and then against Jasmine, she's annoying, but she isn't really that bad. Vileplume might have extra damage here, but I'm still two-shotting everything with Bellossom. What this means is for both Pokemon, they have an even chance in beating Jasmine. I just need to get lucky here. And with Bellossom, I pull it off with only one reset. That said, the game doesn't really get easier now, because Petrol in the Radio Tower is next, and he has 6 poison types on his team. With either Petal Dance or Return, I cannot one-shot them. That leaves me exposed to Sludge with Poison on any turn, Self-Destruct for massive damage, or Smokescreen to lower my accuracy. Plus, his ace Wheezing has Explosion just so that it can do massive damage after the coughing chip away at me. But Bellossom doesn't even make it to his ace. I tried one more time before feeling completely hopeless about this fight, and then I proceeded through Ice Path. Unfortunately, this doesn't really bring any upgrades for Bellossom. I could teach Rest now, which is one possibility for Petrol since he has such a long team. It does make the fight a little bit more consistent, especially when I can get away from Sludge. However, it exposes me to additional turns of Smokescreen, which can prolong the fight even more. And in cases like this, it will reduce the number of resets that I have, but not always the real time that it takes me to beat a trainer. Another way to get a little bit more damage for Petrol is going back to the first route of the game and picking up the Pink Bow to increase Return's output. However, this is still not nearly enough damage to one-shot even the coughing. Because of that, I did decide to go for the Rest strategy here with Bellossom, and I have a really long first fight against Petrol. Smokescreen prevents me from using Return on the Wheezing, and it uses Explosion, finishing Bellossom. Once again, the training principle that I was talking about against Rival 3. It doesn't really make sense to train for this fight unless I'm going to start one-shotting the coughing. And with my current damage range, I think I would need 3 or more damage rounding thresholds in order to pull that off. So level 48 or 50. I checked my intuition here with some math, and at level 45, Return has a 71.3% chance to one-shot the coughing, which is significantly better. And at level 48, I have a guarantee with Return. But I wasn't doing this math in real time, I did it while doing this voiceover, so I didn't know these damage ranges, and anyways, I don't think that I would have decided to train 4 more levels in order to get a more consistent fight here. Instead, I doubled down and I tried to win this one with luck and Rest. I took one more reset, but then eventually I was able to scrape through. Okay, the rival in the underground. This one's also really awful. Golbat confuses me, does tons of damage with Wing Attack, and then Quilava comes in. I'm lucky that it's not fully evolved for this fight because I just barely survive its hit from Flame Wheel and then two-shot using Return. Magnemite's next. Here I can use Rest. I was hoping it would go for Thunder Wave, it didn't, but eventually I wake up and I two-shot with Return, not getting paralyzed in the process, which is perfect because Haunter is next. I didn't think I would one-shot, and I don't even get close, but it uses Curse, knocking itself out, allowing me to move on to the Sneasel. And while I can't one-shot using Petal Dance, which I am locked into now, I luckily survive the Curse damage and finish his final Pokemon on red hit points. In Radio Tower, there is one more executive that has Fire and Poison Pokemon. Gosh, Grass types are really terrible in Generation 2. The vast majority of these battles I go into and I have a type disadvantage. That said, this fight is never really that difficult, so Bellossom pulls through with no issues. Unfortunately for me, the bad type effectiveness just continues because Claire is next and she's a Dragon type specialist. More Pokemon that resist Grass type moves. I'm gonna have neutral damage for her Kingdra, but I can't one-shot the Dragonairs, meaning I get paralyzed right at the beginning of the fight. Now, she is gonna send in her third Dragonair second. This is because it has Ice Beam, which it views as super effective. That allows me to knock it out and then use Rest on the second Dragonair before the Kingdra comes in, which is really good for Bellossom, because then I won't be paralyzed, unless it goes for Thunder Wave on the turn that I'm awake and attacking with Return. But instead it uses Dragon Breath. This doesn't paralyze, I knock it out and move on to the Kingdra. I'm going to do neutral damage here with Petal Dance, but I think Return is also just going to two-shot, and it's not doing very much damage when it attacks with Surf. And I was correct, I'm able to two-shot, taking an easy win over the 8th gym leader despite type effectiveness. There's one more battle before Bellossom is ready for the Elite Four. In this case, it's against the rival, and once again, this fight is terrible. He starts with an Ice type, then he has Golbat, Magneton, Haunter, Kadabra, and Typhlosion. They're not going to come in that order, instead it's Sneasel, Golbat, followed by Typhlosion, explosion. By the time I knock it out, I'm in a decent spot because it can then use rest against the Magneton, slowly knock it out using return. This is terrible. It takes forever. I have to use rest 2 times to make it by it, but by the time it goes down, the rest of the fight is simple. Petal Dance one-shots the Haunter, and it also takes out the Kadabra. Okay, Bellossom got through this with no resets here. Now it's ready for the Elite Four. Let's catch up with Vileplume. I just defeated Jasmine, so I can now pick up Sludge Bomb and teach this to Vileplume for a significantly better go-to move. Its effective power without the Poison Barb is 135. Although Sludge Bomb right before Petrol is not amazing because then I have to beat him with return, and Vileplume has a similar scenario here that Bellossom had. Although the key difference is the Poison type is good defensively. I'm not able to be poisoned by Sludge, and I also don't take as much damage. Because of that, he is less likely to go for moves like Explosion or Self-Destruct because he's not going to see the knockout. And due to this, I only have 1 reset here before taking a victory. Sludge Bomb makes the rival in the underground easier. I can one-shot Pokemon like the Quilava instead of two-shotting. With the Poison Barb for Claire, I can one-shot all of her Dragonairs and two-shot the Kingdra, making this fight trivial. Theoretically, there are only 2 ways to lose this fight. Number 1, Kingdra goes for Smokescreen, and then I have ridiculously bad luck. Or number 2, Kingdra goes for Dragon Breath, paralyzes, and then I have ridiculously bad luck. With a critical hit, Hyper Beam only does between 44 and 53% damage. It should go without saying, but I'm going to pick up all of the rare candies in these playthroughs so that I'm not skimping on levels, because I want to be a high level by the time I'm facing red. For Vileplume, the rival battle in Victory Road is easier because of Sludge Bomb, and so now both Pokemon are ready for the Elite Four. Let's see how they do. If one of the two is going to struggle against Will, it's going to be Vileplume because of its poison typing. Here's the thing though, it's already faster than every single member of his team. Poison is neutral against Psychic type Pokemon, so with Sludge Bomb I can one-shot the Xatu, one-shot the Jinx, but I just barely don't one-shot the Ace Xatu. It survives but gets poisoned, and when it uses Psychic, it does do a ton of damage because it gets a critical hit, but then it faints from status condition damage. As a result, Executor comes in next, and Sludge Bomb is super effective here. This is one of the few Pokemon in the game that actually takes super effective damage from this move, which is nice for once. It's one of the reasons I like to call Sludge Bomb a replacement for Return, since it's typically doing neutral damage to most targets. Slowbro is the only Pokemon left over. Now it does have Psychic, but it also likes to set up with either Curse or Amnesia on turn 1. I wasn't sure which choice it was going to make, but it doesn't even matter because with Petal Dance I can easily one-shot. And so Will ends up being not a problem at all. Okay, so Koga, technically a type advantage here because he is a poison type specialist. I'm using a grass type Pokemon, although Vileplume should be better against him because of its poison typing, whereas Bellossom will take super effective damage from his poison type moves. That said, let's go through the poison type moves he actually has. Ariados has none, Venomoth has Toxic, Fortress has none, Muck has Acid Armor, Sludge Bomb, and Toxic. It's actually a poison type for once. And then there's Crobat, which only has Toxic. I guess it does have Wing Attack, which will be super effective against my grass type Pokemon, but overall, the poison type specialist isn't really a poison type specialist. He's more of a stall and status condition specialist. He loves to use Minimize or Double Team in combination with Toxic, but this doesn't actually end up being the biggest problem for Vileplume. The issue here is that it takes time to knock out the Fortress. Now, I've made one AI modification during battles to my ROM when I play these solo challenges, and that's so that the enemy always sees it as if my team only consists of one Pokemon. I feel like this is only fair, because otherwise the AI is going to make weird choices, like using Mean Look so that I can't switch out my Pokemon, but I only have HM users as the rest of my party. It makes sense that the AI can see the fact that I am doing a solo challenge, and it was a really easy modification to make in Generation 2. If you're playing the game and you only have a single team member, then Koga is more likely to use Explosion with his Fortress. That's the implication that this modification has on this battle. If he sees that I only have Vileplume, then he's more likely to explode, and as a result, when he does, he knocks out Vileplume because this move does massive damage. So I guess I lose to Koga, which is kind of weird. I decided to change up my moveset so I have access to a better special move. I can teach Sunny Day in the place of Absorb, which has long overstayed its welcome, and then I can put Solar Beam in the place of Petal Dance. This way I won't be getting confused confused in the middle of the fight, and I can do a lot more damage with my special moves, which I was hoping would let me knock the Fortress out quicker. However, then because of confusion due to Supersonic from Venomoth, I get taken to low health from its Psychic, and then I move on to the Crobat with only 25 hit points remaining. It just uses Wing Attack and that's it. Okay, I'm getting walled by Koga. This is not what I was expecting. I tried one more time, but it's still not working out. I'm missing against the Crobat, and then it finishes me with Wing Attack. So maybe it's time to use rare candies and boost Vileplume's level. Even though my experience isn't in the perfect place to make this happen, I am sacrificing a little bit. But with 7 rare candies, I can boost Vileplume up to level 58 over a damage rounding threshold, and I am hoping that this is gonna make Koga easier. And it does, because the Venomoth is now a one-shot, which means I'm not gonna get hit by Supersonic. But it doesn't solve the main problem in the fight, the fact that the Crobat is setting up a ton of double teams and I still have to two-shot. I took another loss, not even making it to the Fortress, and at this point I was starting to consider if I should just black out and try and train against Will. But then I got lucky in the next fight. I crit the Crobat, knocking it out in a single turn, and because of that I moved on to the Fortress with green health. Now, this Pokemon is not known for its damage output, and unless I'm at low health and it sees that it can knock me out with Explosion, it's not going to go for the move. Plus, I can now use Sunny Day and 3-shot with Solar Beam, avoiding Explosion entirely. That leads to Muck, and I easily 2-shot using Return. Okay, Koga was a bit of a problem. Hopefully the remaining 2 Elite Four members are not going to be the same. Bruno's next, and the Hitmons don't have high physical defense, so using Sludge Bomb here is very effective. After that, I have to 2-shot his ace Machamp, but it doesn't really have a move that can do good damage to grass types. Rock Slide's what it's choosing. He tries to save it with a potion, but this doesn't matter. In the end, Onix is all that's left over, and while I have to charge up Solar Beam for one turn, it just sets up Sandstorm and then goes down. Karen is always scary if she gets a sand attack off with the Umbreon, but the AI has a debuff on this move so it can miss, and in this case it does. Because of that, the whole fight becomes significantly easier. Well, she does send in Houndoom second, but I just one-shot with Sludge Bomb. Yeah, this fight's really straightforward from there. I one-shot the Vileplume. I have to take multiple turns against the Gengar, but it doesn't really matter since it's so late into the fight. It also goes for Curse outspeeding me, which means I take no damage from the status condition on this turn, allowing me to set up with Sunny Day and then one-shot with Solar Beam on the next turn. Because it faints, I still take no damage from the status condition, and then I can just one-shot the Murkrow, avoiding damage entirely. Bellossom's going to be a little bit different. Without access to Sludge Bomb, it does have less damage output during this section of the game. Because of this against Will, I'm not able to one-shot the first Xatu, and I get confused as a result. Then I hit myself, get put to sleep by the Jinx, tank an Ice Punch which does tons of damage. Luckily, Will isn't always using it, instead sometimes going for Double Slap, which is exactly what I need to get more time to knock the Jinx out. Then, against the Executor, I spend my time using Rest to heal up, slowly knocking it out. Psychic isn't doing that much damage, but it could lower my special defense. Luckily, it doesn't. Then I finish off the Xatu and one-shot the Slowbro. So will Koga be as bad as he was with Vileplume? And I was incredibly surprised here. Because I lack the poison type, I am taking less damage from the Venomoth's Psychic. Makes sense that his Psychic type Pokemon would have been causing problems for my poison type. So in this case, being a mono grass type is actually an advantage here. I have much more health by the time I'm making it to his later team members, and he's also sending them in a different order. Crobat comes in after Muck, and it just goes for Toxic instead of setting up Double Team. After that, Fortress comes in, and while I don't have good damage here, and I am afflicted by Toxic, when it uses Explosion, it doesn't do enough damage. Bellossom just survives and beats Koga on its first attempt, which I think is an incredibly surprising result after what we experienced with Vileplume. Bruno ends up being easy as well. While I'm not one-shotting things here, this is largely related to the fact that I didn't use my rare candies prior to Koga. I just didn't need to with Bellossom. So what about Karen? And unfortunately, this is where everything goes downhill. Without Sludge Bomb, I have to 3-shot the Umbreon, which exposes me to both Sand Attack and Confuse Ray. I take a bunch of damage due to the status conditions, and I'm on half health by the time the Vileplume comes in. I can't one-shot it, I also miss, miss and then get hit by Stun Spore and just everything falls apart. I do knock out her grass type, however, then Houndoom comes in, uses Flamethrower, and deals massive damage. By the way, I misclicked here using Petal Dance, which is obviously not the right choice. This was gonna be a loss anyway. If painful fact number 1 about Karen is the fact that I have to 3-shot the Umbreon, painful fact number 2 is that I have 1 less speed than the Houndoom at my current level. So it's gonna move first and attack twice with Flamethrower, because Bellossom definitely can't one-shot with Return. I don't even get a chance in the next fight since it gets a critical hit. But in the third fight, we get to see the damage range, and yeah, it's not enough to knock out her ace. So after a max potion, she uses her second Flamethrower and Bellossom faints. I think it's only wise to use 1 rare candy now so that I can outspeed the Houndoom and prevent it from using a second Flamethrower. And that only happens if I don't get paralyzed by the Vileplume, which I also need to 2-shot, so Stun Spore needs to miss, or I have to run the Paralyzed Cure Berry, which in this case I'm not. I'm using the Pink Bow for increased return damage. As a result, the Houndoom once again gets 2 Flamethrowers and Bellossom goes down. I tried to play around it with Stun Spore, but it didn't end up working out. Right now, I want you to think about the fact that I was doing this Bellossom playthrough second. I made the decision here against Karen because she was causing so many problems to Blackout, knowing what was coming at the end of the game. This allows me to go all the way back through Will, Koga, and Bruno, who are not issues for Vileplume, gaining experience on the way. Well, I thought they weren't going to be issues, but this time the Fortress does explode, doing enough damage, and Bellossom faints. So I take another Blackout and then defeat Will again before beating Koga the second time around. This time I had to use Rest to ensure that it would happen. I make it back to Karen at level 56. This allows me to 2-shot the Umbreon using Return, and then I avoid Stun Spore from Vileplume and Houndoom comes in. I'm naturally faster than it now, and I can 2-shot using Return, moving on to the remainder of her team members. Petal Dance takes care of Gengar. I still have to use it against the Murkrow, which gets a bit sketchy. It does a decent amount of damage and I have to 2-shot. Luckily, Bellossom doesn't confuse itself. It survives the damage from both Murkrow's feint attack as well as Curse and knocks it out, surviving the fight on red health. But the bad news just continues. Now the grass types have to go up against what is essentially a flying type specialist. Let's take on Lance. Okay, issue number 1, Gyarados is first and I have to 2-shot. That allows it to set up Rain Dance, which messes up Solar Beam. Issue number 2, Dragonite is not a 2-shot with Return. At least it didn't look like it was, but I rolled better damage with the second hit. This exposes Bellossom to Thunder Wave, but luckily Lance sends in Aerodactyl next. Unfortunately, I'm slower than it, so it's able to do super effective damage with Wing Attack. This leaves Bellossom with under half health for the Charizard, and yeah, it's doing so much damage with Flamethrower, I can't even use Rest to heal here. If I was getting paralyzed by the Dragonite, I was hoping to use Rest to recover, but this doesn't work on the Aerodactyl. It does too much damage with Wing Attack, and I can't squeeze in 1 more turn of Return to slowly chip away at it. I tried to instead use Rest on the Dragonite, but this is also not a good option because then it can use Blizzard for super effective damage. While I can eventually knock it out, then I move on to Aerodactyl, and I don't have enough health to spam Return here to finish it. After all, my normal type move needs 3 shots on this rock type. I tried using Sunny Day and Solar Beam, but no, this all just isn't working. So in the end, I decided to Blackout here with Bellossom, again, knowing what is coming in the late game. I'm going to keep fighting the League because they give good experience compared to everything else in Johto, and I'll make my way back to Lance at a higher level. By the way, Bellossom can still lose to Koga, which is pretty frustrating. I make it back to Lance's chamber at level 61. I have saved all of my rare candies, so I can use 7 of them to get to level 68 before fighting him again. This is such a massive damage boost, but I still can't one-shot the Gyarados. Come on. Anyways, I am going to 2-shot the Dragonites now, and I can use Rest here because my health is much higher. Although, I do want to point out one annoying fact. In Generation 2, there is a badge boost glitch, which causes your special defense not to receive a boost unless your special attack is between certain ranges. Bellossom's unboosted special attack would need to be 206 or higher to receive the special defense boost, and it also needs to be lower than 400 133, but no Pokemon really gets there unless they're using setup moves like Growth. Because I haven't yet received my special defense boost, I am taking more damage from moves like Blizzard or Fire Blast later into this fight. But luckily the Ace Dragonite just tries to set up with Safeguard, giving me time to knock it out. From there, he only has one Dragonite left, but he's sending this one in last because its moveset is uniquely bad against grass types. It has Thunder Wave, Twister, Thunder, and Hyper Beam. Of course, the normal type move does the most damage, but because of my high level, I take very little from it and finish him on the next turn. Bellossom gets a Lance Split of 1 hour, 32 minutes, and 32 seconds. This is really not a good performance. A lot of Pokemon have beaten the entire game by this point. I thought that Vileplume might have an easier time against Lance since I did use Rare Candies earlier into the league to beat Koga. I also have access to Sludge Bomb, but no, this doesn't really help, he's still kind of a nightmare. Plus, I have lower special defense, and Vileplume is definitely not receiving the boost. I get paralyzed by the Dragonite and then knocked out by the Aerodactyl using Wing Attack. Here's the thing though, my lower special defense might actually be an advantage here because it seems like the second Dragonite, which he sends in second, is using Blizzard, which gives me a 30% chance to make it by this Dragonite without taking any damage with no status condition. Against the Aerodactyl, I can set up Sunny Day and then one-shot using Solar Beam, so it only takes 2 turns to knock out. Vileplume is faster than the Charizard, and with Sludge Bomb, I just barely don't one-shot, which is so frustrating. I get hit by Flamethrower and Vileplume goes down. I was pretty sure that this was going to be possible though. I tried using Rest on Aerodactyl, and I do manage to get by it, but then I have too low health for the Charizard, and unfortunately I can't use Rest here. Flamethrower is just doing too much. However, sometimes I do roll enough damage to one-shot the Charizard, and as a result, when that happens, I can then move on to the Ace Dragonite. It does have Fire Blast, and I was scared that it was going to go for it. However, instead it chooses Outrage, not doing much damage, and I knock it out in 2 hits using Sludge Bomb. That lets me use Rest on the final Dragonite and then knock it out in 2 turns with Sludge Bomb. Vileplume gets a significantly better Lance Split of 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 52 seconds. So I ended up not doing any Blackout training during the league with it. And I also used my Rare Candies much earlier, which means at the end of the game, it's going to be a lower level. This doesn't impact it during the Kanto section of the game. Now, Sabrina's Alakazam has 127 speed, and Vileplume has 123 when it's fighting Erica. So I thought that the smartest thing to do was just fight all of the other gym leaders first and then fight Sabrina last right before Blue. Misty, Surge, Brock, Blaine, Janine, and then Sabrina are all easy with Vileplume. Blue is typically the most difficult gym leader just because his team has good type diversity. Also, he has a bunch of Pokemon that are super effective against grass types. Pidgeot's his lead, Alakazam is second, and Arcanine's going to be third. That said, the Pidgeot isn't really a good Pokemon. Then Alakazam just sets up Reflect, doing no damage before fainting. After that, Arcanine comes in, and while Reflect is helpful here, Flamethrower is doing less than half, so I have just enough time to knock out his ace. Well, I would have if he didn't use a full restore. But then Reflect fades, and I have increased damage with Sludge Bomb, finishing it just barely in time. From here, things get easier. Gyarados is next, and I'm most scared of Hyper Beam, but I can just use Rest, fully heal myself, and then knock it out slowly. From there, I have Sludge Bomb for Executor, which comes in next because it does no Sunny Day, which the AI views as a super effective move against grass types. Rhydon is last, and it gets a critical hit with Earthquake while I'm charging Solar Beam. Luckily, even this doesn't do enough damage, and Vileplume finishes the fight with a one-shot. At a higher level, Bellossom has a similarly easy time during Kanto. I could have even fought Sabrina first since my speed is more than enough right away. Instead, I take her on second, which is the more smooth route through this section of the game. After that, no problems, even against the trainers that have type advantages like Blaine and Janine. By the time I arrive at Blue, Bellossom is level 73, which is incredibly high. This is typically a level that you shoot for against the final trainer in the game. Because of that, his team is quite easy. Also, this is where I really want to emphasize the fact that due to type effectiveness, the trainers are sending in their team members in fundamentally different orders. In this case, Pidgeot leads, but then Executor is second because it has Sunny Day. I finish it in 2 turns, and hilariously, instead of setting up Sunny Day, it goes for Solar Beam, which makes very little sense. Then Arcanine doesn't have the sun-boosted Flamethrower, and Bellossom gets a critical hit with Return one-shotting. I'm not sure if that mattered, we'll have to wait and see. Alakazam goes down to a single hit from return because I have 2 more speed than this Pokemon at my high level. After that, Gyarados is a 2-shot. It tries to set up Rain Dance, and Hyper Beam isn't doing enough damage, so I can re-establish Sunny Day and then one-shot the Rhydon with Solar Beam. Okay, final trainer in the game. I pick up 1 more rare candy before Mount Silver. It, alongside the other 2 rare candies from Kanto, allow me to boost Bellossom up to level 77 before I take on Red. Note here that my special attack is 225. If we take out my badge boosts from this stat, that gives me 200 special attack, which is 6 points too low to get my special defense boost, which is very disappointing, especially because almost all of Red's Pokemon deal special damage, with the exception being Snorlax. And it's the whole reason that Curse ends up being a fantastic move in the late game of Pokemon Crystal. I think I'm going to have to use it today, so I teach it in the place of Solar Beam. Now, let's see how Bellossom does against the final trainer in the game. A grass type has an advantage here, and that's that I can set up Curse against the Pikachu without worrying about the damage from Thunder. It can paralyze me, which is annoying, but this only slows down my progress. Eventually, I'm going to be able to use Rest, starve out Red's PP on both Thunder and Thunderbolt, then Pikachu will have to use Quick Attack into a Pokemon that has set up with Curse, and after that, I should be able to sweep my way through Red's team. Unless the Pikachu keeps using Charm, which is a fairly low chance of happening, but the more time I give it, the more likely this is to happen. And I didn't use PP ups on Curse, so I run out of uses of the move, and I have to knock out the Pikachu when I only have +4 attack. I'm hoping this is going to be enough for the remainder of the fight. Now, due to type effectiveness, Red chooses to send in Venusaur second because it has Sunny Day. By the way, this fight would play completely different if Venusaur came after Charizard in the team ordering, because then Charizard would come out second and use Flamethrower right away, without getting set up from Sunny Day, because that's what Venusaur does before I knock it out with Return. This allows Charizard to go for a sun-boosted Flamethrower, which inflicts massive damage, and Bellossom just barely survives on red health. But this isn't enough to win, because then strangely Espeon comes in. I thought it was going to be Blastoise because it has Blizzard, but no, Red is choosing to send out his Psychic type next. This is because he views Blastoise as weak to Bellossom, because Bellossom is a grass type and Blastoise is a water type. Unfortunately, the Espeon is the fastest member of his team. It goes for Psychic, and that's it. The solution here is pretty obvious. I need to teach Protect in the place of Sunny Day. Then, I can use this to starve out the Pikachu and block Charm more effectively. I can also stall out now for more healing with the leftovers. But there's still a problem against the Venusaur, because if it sets up Sunny Day, then the Charizard just does too much damage and I'm back in the same position I was in before. It took me a little while to figure this out, but what I need to do is I have to stall out the Venusaur. If I can make it run out of PP on Sunny Day, which only has 5 uses, then I can time things so that I knock it out before it uses Struggle, move on to the Charizard without sun boosted damage, and finish it hopefully surviving with enough to then tank a Psychic from Espeon. Eventually, I'm able to pull this off. I one-shot Venusaur and I move on to the Charizard with full health. Flamethrower does roughly half, just a little bit more. I heal some health with leftovers, use Protect once, and then I can tank a Psychic. I finish Espeon, move on to Snorlax. It's not really effective because physical moves aren't doing enough due to Curse. I finish it with one Return, and then with full health, Blastoise doesn't choose Blizzard, instead setting up Rain Dance, and I one-shot. Bellossom clocks in with a first playthrough time of 1 hour, 58 minutes, and 37 seconds. It had 30 resets, 6 blackouts, and it finished the game at level 77, with a game time of 6 hours and 27 minutes. With Vileplume, Red is quite a bit different. Because of the poison typing, he's going to send in Espeon second and hit me with a super effective Psychic right away. This move does so much damage, bringing me down to orange health. Although, then he sends in Snorlax because he's viewing its Psychic type moves as super effective against my poison typing. This is why Venusaur isn't coming in next. Because of that, I can simply survive its Body Slam because I've set up Curse on the Pikachu, then use Rest, knock it out, and I have full health or close to full health for the remainder of the fight. But I messed things up here. I went for Sludge Bomb right away against Venusaur, it sets up Sunny Day, and then Charizard comes in and obliterates me with Flamethrower. The proper way to play this is simply stall out the Venusaur once again when Sunny Day fades, knock it out, then survive Flamethrower, knock out the Charizard, and move on to the Blastoise. But this is a problem. Since I've tanked damage from Flamethrower, Blastoise is gonna see the knockout with Blizzard and not go for Rain Dance. Luckily, this Ice-type move has a 30% chance to miss, and it does. So Vileplume finishes the game with a time of 1 hour, 40 minutes, and 7 seconds, with 24 resets at level 72. This is a game time of 5 hours and 38 minutes. If we put the results side by side, Vileplume massively outperformed Bellossom. It was 18 minutes and 29 seconds faster. Remember, there's some rounding differences here due to milliseconds. It also had 6 less resets, 6 less blackouts, and it finished the game 5 levels lower, with a game time that was 49 minutes faster. The timeline graphs for these two playthroughs show us just how much faster Vileplume was in every section of the game. The Bellossom graph is rarely faster. The only spot that stands out to me is the Jasmine split, which is the shortest section of the game. So it doesn't really pay to have an advantage there, but like I said during the playthroughs, both of the Pokemon just had to luck through her, so Bellossom didn't even have an advantage there. Now getting into follow-up playthroughs, let's continue with Vileplume and talk about what I did to make this run as easy as possible. And these two Pokemon are going to improve dramatically from their first playthrough into the second playthrough, just because Hidden Power fundamentally changes their type coverage. There are a lot of different Hidden Powers that can benefit grass types. In the past, I have found that Hidden Power Rock pairs very well with grass types. It solves flying, ice, bug, and fire type Pokemon. Most notably, it gives grass types a way to one-shot the 2 Charizard that appear in the game. But I don't think that it's the right choice for these two. It's physical, which does kind of help against Morty, but I would like to have a special move that I can use throughout the mid-game. Also, I want something that's going to help me against Petrol, as well as helping me against Jasmine. And for those two alone, I want to get something that's going to deal special damage, especially to synergize with these two Pokemon's higher special attack stat. I hate to say it, but sometimes the generic option is the best pick, and in this case I went with Hidden Power Ice. I contemplated going for Hidden Power Psychic since it does help against the ghosts in Ecruteak City, but in the end I think that Hidden Power Ice is going to give me the most flexibility. It also impacts these two Pokemon's stats as little as possible. They have 15 in all of their DVs, with the exception of Defense, which drops down to 13. In the early game, I do have to make some choices with Vileplume. Now, it can beat Falkner at a lower level like you saw in the previous playthrough, and I tried to do this again in my follow-up attempt, but I kept losing in the early game, and I got really frustrated with this strategy, especially because then I'd make it to Azalea Town and just lose to the rival or to Bugsy and have to start all over again because I didn't want to accept resets in this section of the game. Because of this frustration, I decided to play Falkner a little bit safer, which involves going to Sprout Tower, fighting some of the sages, and then taking on Falkner at level 12, leveling to 13. I think if you want to get the best possible time with Vileplume, I would not recommend doing this. Fight Falkner as close to minimum battles as is possible. You have to fight some optional trainers before getting to Violet City so you can be level 8 by the time you fight Birdkeeper Abe, but if you do that, you can make it through this gym. It's just much less likely. Okay, unfortunately, I don't have good news for you in the next section of the game because everything plays out identically to how you saw it before. Yes, I'm using the Miracle Seed this time around, and it does help a little bit, but I just need to get lucky against Bugsy. I have to use Stun Spore, mess up the Scyther, and then finish it slowly using Petal Dance. Since I've over-leveled fighting almost every trainer up to Azalea Town, I can now one-shot the rivals Ghastly with Petal Dance, making this fight so much easier. Also, I have ensured that Vileplume is faster than the Quilava, just so I'm not taking an extra turn of damage. Typically in my playthroughs, I was losing to either Falkner because I was trying the low-level strategy, or I was losing to Bugsy just because of bad luck. It was rarer for me to lose to the rival, but I did have to restart here a couple of times. But in this playthrough, I was able to make it by him with no resets, and because of that, I thought that this was the one. Inside the National Park, I'm going to grab the Quick Claw. This item is incredibly important for Vileplume to have success, because it's gonna have a problem that I didn't experience during my first playthrough. For Whitney, just knock out the Clefairy with Absorb and then Petal Dance the Miltank. This is the most consistent way to play, but the faster way to play is using Petal Dance on both and just hoping that Confusion doesn't mess you up against her ace. If it did, I would have restarted because taking a reset here is absolutely unacceptable. She should never be a problem for either of these Pokemon. Alright, Hidden Power Ice. It helps against the rival in Burned Tower because I can two-shot the Haunter. Then, using Return, I can two-shot the Quilava, and while I do take Curse and Ember damage here, it doesn't matter, because then the following Magnemite is a two-shot with Return. The only way this goes wrong is is if it hits me with Supersonic and then Vileplume damages itself, which is exactly what happens. Unfortunately, not just once, but twice. I critical hit the Magnemite in the next fight, but then I miss my hidden power because of an accuracy drop, and then the Zubat hits with Supersonic and this messes me up. So 2 resets here to this rival. I think the solution to this fight is holding the Bitterberry just to counter out confusion tactics. If you can prevent one Supersonic from doing anything, then this whole fight becomes much easier. I didn't figure it out here, but I don't have a 3rd reset. I beat him this time around. Damage ranges for Morty. Hidden Power Ice guarantees a 1-hit on the Ghastly, and it has a 78.5% chance to one-shot the Haunter. It 2-shots his final 2 Pokemon. Unfortunately, Vileplume underspeeds the Gengar, and I could level up one more time in order to guarantee the outspeed, but I didn't think this was necessary since Hypnosis is so inconsistent. And if I'm not going to get hit by Curse, I don't really need to fear Morty. Even if he hits Hypnosis, I could just wake up before he attacks with Dream Eater and finish the Gengar. In this playthrough, I have no resets, and now I am 8 minutes and 38 seconds ahead of my former pace. The mid-game is so much easier with better type coverage. One thing I felt my first playthrough had taught me with Vileplume was that it could beat the game at a lower level than Bellossom, and this seemed like a big advantage. Cutting training is going to save so much time and make things more efficient, even if I slightly destabilize things and take 1 or 2 more resets. An advantage of knowing that I can beat the game at a lower level is that I can use rare candies earlier into the playthrough. So in the mid-game, I trained intentionally to get to level 40 right before Jasmine. Then I can use 5 rare candies to boost myself up to 45 before fighting her. This makes Petal Dance an 80.8% chance to one-shot the Magnemite. I have a 2-hit on the Steelix and then another 80.8% chance on the final Magnemite. Overall, this fight is so much easier now, and I don't even need to use Hidden Power Ice. Speaking of which, it gives 1-hits against all of Petrel's Coughing, making him trivial. It's great against the rival in the underground because I have a guaranteed one-shot on the Golbat and better, more reliable damage for the Haunter later into the fight. It is technically better for Claire, but here it doesn't really matter what Vileplume does. No matter what, it has enough damage to knock out her Pokemon. My moveset right here is Return, Hidden Power Ice, Sludge Bomb, and Petal Dance. And unlike my first playthrough, I'm not going to be using Sunny Day or Solar Beam. I think Petal Dance is the superior grass type move, at least in this section of the game, because it doesn't need 1 turn of setup. And throughout the league, as we saw with Will, I'm going to be using it late into the fight because they hold back the Pokemon that take super effective damage from grass types until later into the battle. With Will defeated, Vileplume is level 54. I'm going to use 2 more rare candies now to boost it to level 56 before Koga to make him as easy as possible. With Hidden Power Ice, everything here is so much easier. I can one-shot the Crobat. After that, I have special damage for the Fortress, so I can 3-shot taking only 1 hit from Swift, and then I 2-shot the Muck with Return. No resets. And with that victory, I am 16 minutes and 41 seconds ahead of my previous time. Vileplume is dominating this second playthrough. And with the Never Melt Ice and super effective damage on all of Lance's Dragonites, I don't need to fear here either. While the Aerodactyl is outspeeding and hitting with Wing Attack, it doesn't matter because Hidden Power Ice also gets a one-shot on it. I don't even need to optimize damage ranges here for the Charizard. I can just 2-shot. It's fine because I one-shot everything else with the Ice-type move. This pushes Vileplume's lead over its previous run even further ahead. I am now 20 minutes and 2 seconds faster. Now, right as I'm beating Janine, I want to mention my vitamins that I used in the department store during the Radio Tower plotline. I purchased 2 protein to improve my attack stat and 4 carbos to improve my speed. This lets me beat Sabrina with an outspeed on all of her psychic-type Pokemon. But in retrospect, this choice had some implications. First of all, it doesn't synergize well enough to give me an outspeed on all of Blue's Pokemon. His Alakazam is still going to move first. And the critical hit I got last time around against the Arcanine was absolutely critical. Without it, I am not able to survive the follow-up hit from Gyarados, so I end up taking 1 reset here. And then I had to completely adjust my strategy, using Curse to defeat Blue, which ends up being a little bit sketchy, but I pull through. Still, I've maintained and built upon my time lead from Lance, although I lost a little bit of time when compared with Sabrina's split. Still, Vileplume at this point is poised to have a massively successful second playthrough. There was only 1 more trainer left and I was really overconfident here. I had failed to make 1 calculation here, and that was how much damage is Espeon going to do with Psychic. At the lower level of 68, its Psychics do between 81 and 95% damage. As you can see here, when I'm setting up against Pikachu, it is doing chip damage occasionally. If I don't completely stall it out until it runs out of Thunder and Thunderbolt, it is highly likely that Espeon is then going to immediately one-shot Vileplume. Now, the way to play around this is just take my time against Pikachu until it's only using Quick Attack, but this does expose me to some resets if it uses repeated charms. But there is still a path to victory. I have the Quick Claw equipped, and this is key for later into the fight. I know that I can't survive both a Flamethrower and a Blizzard from Blastoise. There's essentially no way to make that happen with Vileplume, so what I need is either a Quick Claw activation on the Charizard or the Blastoise, or a Blizzard Miss. I felt like this was safe enough, but there was another factor in this fight that I hadn't considered. If Espeon is doing such ridiculous damage, then I have really low health by the time the Snorlax comes in, and even though I've set up my defense so that it's sky high with Curse, the Snorlax still sees that it's going to get the knockout with Body Slam and prioritizes it. What it really boils down to now at level 68 is that I have to get a Quick Claw activation on the Espeon or on the Snorlax. If I move first on Espeon, I one-shot it and move on to the Snorlax with healthy HP. If I tank damage from Espeon, survive after stalling the Pikachu, then I can move first on Snorlax and heal with Rest. After all of this works out, I am still not through the weeds, because I have to stall out the Venusaur so that it can't use Sunny Day anymore. Then I either outspeed the Charizard with the Quick Claw or survive Flamethrower, giving me another chance to roll for the Quick Claw on Blastoise or for the Blizzard Miss. I think this strategy is good enough if you can survive the Espeon with enough health so that Snorlax prioritizes Amnesia on turn 1. And you really don't need that much health. Around 25 to 30 hit points is enough since your defense is so high. But level 68 just barely doesn't give me the ability to do that. Because of this, the strategy ends up being wildly inconsistent, and I take a total of 10 resets against Red before I beat him. That's a second run time of 1 hour 32 minutes and 31 seconds. It is faster than my first playthrough by 7 minutes and 36 seconds, but look at the difference between my blue split and the red split. That's so disappointing, and I couldn't leave things here for Vileplume. I had to come back and do another run. Let's talk about the key changes that I'm going to make. Number 1, in the department store, I'm going to sell more items so that I can buy myself 8 vitamins, 4 Carbos to ensure the outspeed on Sabrina's Pokemon, and 4 Calcium to improve my special defense against Red's Espeon. By the way, if you didn't know, in Generation 2, Calcium boosts both your special attack and your special defense, since these stats are calculated from a unified quantity of stat experience. This underlying data structure is what makes the game compatible for trades with Generation 1. The second change I made is I have re-strategized how I'm using rare candies and training during this run to squeeze out 2 more levels by the end. My goal is to fight Red at level 70 or 71, like I did during my first playthrough. The slightly higher level ensures that I'm going to survive a hit from Snorlax, and then it's going to go for Amnesia. Even when this happens, things can still go wrong later in the fight, like in this example where Charizard burns Vileplume. As a result, I take a loss, which was so frustrating. Also, I do need to get a Quick Claw activation against either Charizard or the Blastoise. If that doesn't happen, I'm still going to lose. So while the early stages of the fight are much more consistent, the later stages still require luck, and I really wish that I could stack things in the opposite way, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. But in the end, Vileplume pulls through with a much better third attempt. It finishes the game with a time of 1 hour 25 minutes and 17 seconds. This is 7 minutes and 14 seconds faster than my second run. Interestingly, if you look at the splits between run 2 and run 3, you can see that throughout this entire third run, I played more conservatively, losing about half a minute at every single split. This is a small price to pay for so much more consistency in the late game. And in the end, making this investment, I saw great returns. Okay, I'm gonna play Bellossom basically identically to Vileplume, with Hidden Power Ice throughout the mid-game. As you've seen, these two runs play very similarly, so I'm not gonna go through most of the small details with Bellossom up until this point. Instead, I wanna focus our attention on the nuances of the late game. At level 73, Red's Flamethrower does between 63 and 74% damage. Then the Espeon that follows does between 32 and 37% damage with its Psychic. The key here is using Protect, gaining back a little bit of health with the leftovers. Then I'll survive Psychic and move on. I can use Protect one more time, ensuring that I survive a hit from the Snorlax since I've fully set up on the Venusaur. And because of Red's choices in team ordering, I can then heal before the Blastoise comes in and finish it easily with Bellossom. And in this second playthrough with Bellossom, I get a time of 1 hour 24 minutes and 47 seconds. I had 4 resets, 1 to Bugsy, 2 to Blue, and 1 to Red. Bellossom finished the game at level 73 with a game time of 5 hours and 19 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty surprised by these results. Bellossom ends up finishing the game 30 seconds faster than Vileplume did. It also did so with one less reset, one less blackout, and it also beat the game one level higher, although Vileplume's game time was lower. This is because it speeds through most of the game and then runs into most of its problems against Red. Vileplume would have got a better time if it didn't get the burn against Red's Charizard. However, there's another data point that we do need to consider here. I did 3 playthroughs with Vileplume, and I only did 2 with Bellossom. I can summarize things like this. Bellossom is the more consistent Pokemon, but I think that its speed ceiling is going to be a little bit lower, whereas Vileplume is much more inconsistent, but it is going to have the better top speed if you try and shave off time. Another factor in these results is that I did Bellossom's follow-up playthrough before I did Vileplume's. This goes against my principle of playing the underdog first, but it's because of a bunch of production stuff behind the scenes. I had played the Vileplume playthrough quite a while ago, and so it wasn't fresh in my mind, and then I did Bellossom's first playthrough. Because of that, I just went right into its follow-up attempt and optimized things while it was all fresh in my mind. After that, I revisited Vileplume and I did 2 more runs with it. That means I had more experience for Vileplume, yet still it got a worse result when compared with Bellossom's second attempt. For that reason, I think it's fair to rank the 2 Pokemon based on this result. Vileplume might have better peak potential, but Bellossom is more consistent, and in this format where I'm doing 2 to 3 runs, it did outperform. Still though, it's not a very good result when put in context of all of the other crystal finishes. Bellossom earns itself a placement in the middle of the C tier, behind Pokemon like Dragonair and Quillfish, ahead of Sunflora and Elekid. And these 2 Pokemon were so similar that they're actually going to get spots that are side by side. So Vileplume just barely beats out Sunflora, taking the spot next to Bellossom. If I filter the tier list now by grass types, we're gonna notice something very interesting. They are all clustered around the C tier. Venusaur, Bellossom, Vileplume, Sunflora, and Meganium all are in this tier. Celebi the legendary is in the B tier, just slightly above. And then Jumpluff is the underperformer in the E tier, skipping the D tier entirely. I think the peak potential for grass types is severely limited in Generation 2. And this is where you might start wondering about a Pokemon like Victory Bell, which as you'll all know is outstanding in Pokemon Yellow. Well, I don't have good news, but we'll talk about that later. Overall, I don't have high hopes for the grass types, and we're gonna try some really bad ones coming up soon. I'm gonna play both Hoppip as well as Sunkern. Stay tuned for those as I ramp up my releases as we head towards daily December. If you support the channel through YouTube memberships or Patreon, thank you so much, it means the world to me. Now, if you've made it this far, you're incredible. I'll see you in my next video.